In the following episode, we discuss the sudden and tragic loss of Forough Farrokhzad, as well as physical and mental illnesses, including suicide and suicide ideation. For those who are especially struggling with mental illness and depression, help is available through various resources. If you're in Canada or the US, you can dial 988. If you're in the UK, you can dial 116 123. In Australia, you can dial 13 11 14. And if you're in Iran, you can dial 115. Your mental health matters, and you are not alone.
You're listening to Cinema Rex. It's an Iranian film podcast. Episode 16, Forough Farrokhzad's The House is Black. Farn, I want you to do something for me.
Yes?
Name 4 things that are beautiful.
My mom, my dad, my sister Maral, and my sister Melinda.
Okay, now name 4 things that are ugly.
Khajeh, Ruzbe, Mertash, and me. I'm just kidding.
He says, I'm just kidding for the last one.
No, for all 4.
Say a sentence that has the word black in it.
The house is black.
Durur Bashoma Dustana Aziz. This is the Cinema Rex podcast where we talk all things cinema and film and poetry and literature and art and music and dance and
plumbing, taxes.
I'm Kaveh Mohebi.
And I am Farhan Moradi. And today we are discussing
movies.
The House is Black.
Well, first of all, let's introduce a guest. We have a guest, and the great thing about today's guest is it's our first recurring guest ever on the show.
Oh, wow. Who is it? They must have done a really good job.
Why don't you introduce her?
It is Sadaf Khajeh. She was on an episode a few months back. She was on our episode for Holy Spider. It was one of our more controversial episodes. And a lot of people wrote in and told us that they really liked Sadaf on the podcast. They said she had a great podcast voice. She had great insight. She was very knowledgeable about Iranian cinema and how to apply different kinds of cinematic themes and theories to her analysis of the film. And so we thought it was important to bring her on for this episode because if I'm not mistaken, I believe she's even written like a thesis or a paper or something on The House is Back. But anyway, Sadaf, welcome to the show.
She even wrote one on The House is Black too, not just The House is Back.
I said black. As well. Did I not?
Well, we'll go to the tape. Sadaf, welcome to the show.
Hi. Hello. How are you?
Hi.
So good to be back.
It's great to have you. I take it by the fact that you returned that you didn't have such a terrible experience the first time.
No, I didn't. Sorry. I was like, what first time? And then I blanked for a bit there.
Maybe that's why she's back. She blocked it out and she's like, oh, this might be fun. So traumatic
stress.
Yeah.
No, I had a lot of fun. Yeah. And I know I'm going to have a lot of fun now. Talking about The House is Black.
Sweet. What have you been up to since the last time we had you on the show?
Oh gosh. I think the newest development has been we started these like community screenings, frames per second. I know Farhan came to the first one where we just basically screen short films of like people that we know around us that want to screen their films. So far we've had 2 screenings. So the first one was 4 short films, and the second one was the screening of And Still I Sing by Fazila Amiri. Have you seen that documentary or heard about it?
I heard about it from you.
Yeah.
Tell us about the film.
So it's a documentary. They started making it in 2019. Fazila went back to Afghanistan and she filmed 2 of the Afghan Star contestants, Afghan Star being like a music, like a singing, like an American Idol kind of in Afghanistan. And it was their season 14 in 2019 and they had 2 female contestants. So the film is following those 2. But halfway through the film, not even halfway, I think near the end, the Taliban came back and took over. So they had to change.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So it's their stories, but also they had to leave the country. And the last, I think, 10 to 15 minutes of the film is, it gets dramatic. How, as you know, the characters try to get out of the country.
Wow, yeah. And say the name of the film again, so people are listening, they can write it down. And now that they're very invested.
And Still I Sing by Fazila Amiri. A really, cool. Really good documentary.
So other than these screenings that you're putting together, where can someone find those, like these films? Most of them. I mean, just generally by getting in contact with the filmmakers, or
yeah. Well, And Still I Sing, you can watch it on, I think, Prime and YouTube. The other ones, there were 4 short films. One was by Khajeh Muradi, The Shadow of My Life. Another one was Whitewash. Shadow of My Life, you can watch it on CBC Gem. Whitewash by Gulzar Tarawati. I'm not sure if you can watch it anywhere now, but that one's also really good. It's about sort of systemic racism and hiring process, where if your name is not white enough, you don't get hired. And it's just about the experience of immigrants. And the third one was Landed by Shaghiq Haqdoost. You know Shaghiq.
Yeah.
He like blanked for what was that?
Because there's 3 I know, and 2 of them have been at the Mehmuni, so I didn't know. I feel like I had to in my head do last name and think of which one specifically you were talking about. But yes, yeah.
The 4th film was Mama's Boy, directed by Sonny Atkins. Also a really good film about our shadow selves and the voice of our parents in our head.
You remember how this works. We're basically going to go through it in like categories, but this is slightly different. And I'm actually going to suggest we omit some categories for reasons that will become obvious later on. But because the film we are doing today, Sadaf, why don't you introduce what it is?
So The House is Black is a documentary about a leper colony in northwest of Iran called the Baba Baghi leper colony. Forough and I think Gulistan Films were commissioned to make this film about a leper colony, sort of raise awareness of what was going on at the time. It was made in 1963. And yeah, it's about the lepers who live in this colony and who are very isolated from the rest of the society. It's very beautifully edited, and Forough, being a poet herself, I believe has like a very poetic way of making this film and narrating it. Yeah, it's a beautiful film.
I don't think any of us have said her full name yet on this podcast.
Oh, okay. That's another thing about Forough. Forough is so important and famous that people don't say her last name, but her last name is Farrokhzad, Forough Farrokhzad.
Yeah, like Usher, but basically...
Is Usher his real name?
I don't know. But yeah, for those who might not be so familiar with Iranian poetry and its history and legacies, Forough Farrokhzad is the poet. And we're going to go into a lot about her, but let me do a formal... You did a great job on the plot summary, basically stepping all over the only thing I have to contribute today. But I'll just do a formal one too, just to set it up. Okay, first of all, Farsi title. Farhan, you want to take it away, or should I just say Khan Sio asked?
Oh.
You just did it. Good job. I'm proud of you.
Paving the way, thank you. Paving the way for Iranian New Wave, Forough Farrokhzad, also known as Forough or Usher. I'm cutting that out. Sorry, I'm going to do that again.
No, you got to leave it. That's so great.
Paving the way for Iranian New Wave, Forough Farrokhzad's poetic documentary is a look at life and suffering at the Baba Baghi Hospice Leper Colony in Tabriz and focuses on the human condition and the beauty of creation. It is spliced with Forough's narration of quotes from the Old Testament, Quran, and her own poetry. It has a Rotten Tomato score of 100% and an audience score of 95%. So Sadaf, let's start with you. What did you think of The House is Black?
Well, I love it. I've watched it so many times I can't count. But I will say the first time I even heard about it was back in 2000s, like I think 2008, 9. My friend told me about this film that Forough made. I had no idea. And it was about lepers. Leprosy, I knew what it was at the time. But like watching her film, even at the time in like 2000s, it was still pretty graphic watching the film. I don't know if you felt that way. For the modern viewer, I feel like we've seen so many graphic visuals that maybe but back then I think it was for me, wow. I had never seen anything like it on the screen. And
it's also real, right? Like it's
very real. Yeah.
You know that it's not special effects makeup. Like you're watching it and you're like, oh, these are real people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it's still it's quite jarring at first, even for a modern audience, just because, yeah, you're watching real people suffering, and their suffering is so, to use a pun, like it's on the face value. It's very, what's the word I'm thinking of, where it's like just on the surface level. You know what I mean? So certain illnesses, they could be like hidden, but this is very prominent and forward facing. So it's hard to ignore, which is, I think, one of the things that, you know, Forough is sort of extrapolating when she's talking about all the poetic elements, which we'll get into.
No, yeah, I love the film. I've watched it so many times.
How many times would you say, like, realistically, if you had to put a number on it?
Oh, God, like
20?
Yeah, probably, because for my research, I kept going back to it and watched it so many times. Dissect it. Yeah, I love it. Every bit of it, actually.
So what was your paper about?
It was positioning Faroukh's point of view against Judith Butler's notion of the force of nonviolence. So using the act of nonviolence to sort of, I guess, contradict violence. It was very complicated even at the time when I wrote it. But it gave me a chance to actually analyze the film in depth and get closer to Forough in that way.
What kind of nonviolence or juxtaposing violence were you extrapolating from? Just like societal violence or governmental violence?
The society's point of view. It is very violent the way, you know, lepers were treated and imprisoned in these colonies, right? And they were just disregarded.
Yeah. This film was sponsored, like you had mentioned, by the Society for Assisting Lepers, Anjomane Komek be Jozamion. And what I think is very interesting about it is I can imagine a scenario where they were like going to Golestan's studio, which we'll get into specifically later on, and we're like commissioning this short because they said, we need something that's going to be educational, that's going to help inform the people. And then once they gave the reins to Forough to take it over, I could imagine they were like, what is this thing you've made? This, like, you know, like from like a clinical medical point of view, there's
only one little piece in the entire film that's almost like an information segment right in the middle.
But it's such an art, like, and I imagine that middle medical section is probably what were more anticipating receiving, like a whole 20-minute documentary that's like that. And yet this is such an artist or poet's perspective on telling this story, is just like through images and poems and a religion and scriptures. And it's just funny to imagine that they must have been shocked at first when they had received this short. And maybe in like a beautiful way, they were really impressed too. But I can imagine also like scientists and clinical people who were saying, this isn't going to help us at all.
No,
like someone who's super analytical.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think she did that on purpose, where the film starts from like such a objective point of view, and it's focused on the body, even with the students at the beginning.
Yeah,
they're talking about thank God for our body parts, whatever, and then you see that kind of like what's believed to be Ebrahim Golestan's voice explaining the disease, and then eventually, like, she gradually makes it more spiritual, and then more about the mind, and how, in my opinion, these people, because of their bodies, their minds have also been abandoned, even though the disease erodes the body and not the mind. But the situation they're living in sort of erodes them spiritually and, you know, intellectually as well, because they're being ignored.
One thing I just want to quickly explain to the audience, just for context, the way that the film is presented, it's presented like a visual poem. Like when we're saying that, we're not speaking in
hyperbole.
We're not saying that in analogies or hyperbole. There's this voiceover that's over most of the film, and it's a poem essentially, and it's married with visuals, and sometimes the visuals line up literally, sometimes they don't, sometimes they're completely the opposite of what's being spoken, and usually there's like meaning for why that's done that way, with a like 1 minute section in the middle of the film that is more clinical, where it's like, this is the leper colony, this is what leprosy is, this is how it's transmitted, this is how we treat it. And it's like showing it all directly as if it's like a clinical information piece. It's very short. It's a short documentary. It's what, like 20 something minutes?
Yeah.
Like 25 minutes, 22 minutes?
It's less than that, yeah. Just as a background, Forough worked for Golestan Studios as an editor. So she's a pretty good editor to begin with.
So let's start with one of my favorite parts is Kaveh's opening scene corner montage extravaganza. The very first line, because I mean it mostly starts off on a black screen, is there's no shortage of ugliness in this world. There would have been more ugliness if man had closed his eyes to it. What are your takeaways to that being the opening line? Either of you guys jump in.
I think it's a great play on the word ugliness. We know what they're talking about. The ugliness is not any physical ugliness they're talking about. It's, the ugliness that comes when we close our eyes and ignore pain of others and ignore caring for others. And he says, it's our hope to eradicate this ugliness. I mean, it's a nice play on words, eradication, ugliness. Leprosy is a disease that they're trying to eradicate. And, just physically, we know what people, when they first see people with like leprosy, ugliness comes to mind, but there's something that's much uglier, and that's ignoring it altogether, I think.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think the idea of like societal ugliness, the ugliness of humanity, to be able to turn its back on this, turn a blind eye to the pain and suffering, to kind of cast off lepers, which was famously the thing that they thought was needed to be done to treat them, is just put them in their own colony, keep them away from others, and we don't see them and we don't hear from them, and that's a societal ugliness that clearly meant something thought-provoking for Forough, and yeah, she's just kind of like shining a light on it, metaphorically and literally.
Mm-hmm.
To me, it's interesting. I always wonder, why did she use the voice of a man at the beginning and at that sort of factual part? And I'm just wondering, maybe at the time, it made it seem like more of a serious film and documentary that a man spoke about it in such factual terms.
Do you mean when they talk about the medical part in the middle?
The medical part, and also like at the beginning, sort of just to grab the audience's attention.
Yeah, that's interesting. On this screen, you'll see ugliness that no human can ignore, not their faces, the fact that they've been shunned and cast away, ignored, and forgotten.
Can I just ask whose voice is giving the medical explanation in the middle of the film?
I think I read somewhere that it was believed to be Golestan, but probably is Golestan.
I don't know why I assumed it was some doctor at the colony.
Golestan was very involved. It was his studio that sort of had been hired and commissioned to make this film. Forough worked with Golestan, not just directly with him, but for his studio. So I just assumed, from everything I had read, it was like confirmed that it was his voice. So I'm just wondering what you had read that was saying that it was a possibility. Was there
maybe it was?
Oh, okay, interesting.
No, yeah, I'm sure I read it somewhere in like a paper or something was believed, but it probably was Golestan. And thinking about it, in the Golestan studios, how many men worked anyway? It was probably Forough and Golestan who put the edit together.
The very next scene is something I really like a lot, which is they're reading from, I don't know if they're reading from any specific spiritual text or they're reading from the Quran, but thanking God for hands, eyes, ears. The irony of these things, the bitter irony of these students, some of which don't have hands, some of them which don't have ears. And the lines that they're reading is thanking God for these things. It's like one of the first scenes early on, and there's such a sardonic, dark, kind of pointing a finger at spirituality of like, don't forget to thank God for all these wonderful blessings you have. Meanwhile, these are children suffering.
Okay, I got a very different reading of that.
Yeah, sure.
My reading of that was, and then Sadaf is going to come in and tell us how we're both wrong with her extensive research. But my reading of that was that the people who are speaking are thankful of the things that they still have. So like, you're not seeing someone who's lost their hand saying that they're grateful to God for their hands. Do you know what I mean? The people who are speaking, they're speaking to the things that they still have. And I think that it's a situation where these people who are suffering and have lost their limbs and some of their physical faculties are coming in and talking about the things that they are grateful for. That's how I understood it.
I think the element of school and children, I think, plays a big part in this whole film, just children as well, because children are a source of hope, but over and over, we see them as a source of hope, but also despair.
Mm-hmm.
They're a source of hope because there's life and they're learning and they're growing. And I think at the beginning, when you see them in the classroom, thanking God for their hands and eyes, it's supposed to show how these kids or these children in this colony are still a source of hope and they're still learning. To contradict that, at the very last scene in the in the classroom, when they say something ugly, they mention hands and legs and head, and then there's that despair again, like children that are losing life in a way.
Then moving from that scene, you have what can probably best be described as a neurodivergent man singing. I really like this image because I actually think the tune that he's singing is quite beautiful and rhythmic.
Wait, why do you think he was neurodivergent?
I don't think he had all his faculties.
Really?
Yes.
Interesting. I just thought he was like having a good time and he was trying to entertain the people around him, because he does it again later for a little girl and she's like, she enjoys it.
Yeah, I mean, neurodivergent people can entertain people.
I guess that's true.
But no, I don't know. I think that scene is the start of her showing presence of life and culture and happiness and celebration. Like there's music there now. There's, the people are singing, they're celebrating.
The middle scene, it's about nearly halfway. They start getting to the clinical settings reinforced by an off-screen male voice that is believed to be Golistan. It disrupts the flow of the diegetic world of the lepers. And it was put in as Farrokhzad, or as Forough noted in a post-screening discussion defending the section, to show that when all is said and done, this is quoting Forough, when all is said and done, leprosy is curable. And I think that we have been able to prove this to the spectator. So I guess at some point in time in a post-screening discussion, someone had asked the purpose of this because they maybe liked the beautiful stuff more. And they were like, why did you put in this medical clinical part? And Forough thought it was very important to put in, to just show that this is a curable disease, and with treatment, it can be cured, especially if it's early treatment.
No, I think it's an important part, actually, because especially when he says it's not hereditary, I'm not sure how much the public at the time knew what leprosy was or how they would get infected, or if it was like hereditary, because that's very important. That means like if a child was born in a leper colony, doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have leprosy, right? That you shouldn't exclude the younger generation and sort of isolate them. So I think that was a very important part, just the factual part.
How is leprosy contracted?
It's a bacteria.
Okay.
And lack of hygiene.
I see. Okay.
That grows the bacteria.
Kaveh missed the medical part in the middle that explained what leprosy is.
They didn't say it was a bacteria.
No, they didn't. You're right. But yeah, it's contracted through, if they're like, I guess it's through some of the pus and stuff, and the bacteria, if it gets exposed and someone else touches that and doesn't wash themselves, then it can fester. It's funny because I was starting to have a couple thoughts in my head about like, oh, I wonder if leprosy can be passed on. Like I was curious how it kind of worked. And then this section came up right as I was starting to have those thoughts. Like the timing was like perfect. It was like it was setting it up. And then just as the audience starts to have those questions, they're like, by the way, here's the answers to your questions. Okay, now we're getting back to the movie.
A Google search says Hansen's disease does not spread easily from person to person. You cannot get leprosy through casual contact, such as shaking hands, sitting next to, or talking to someone who has the disease. Prolonged close contact with someone with untreated Hansen's disease over many months is needed to become infected. One of the things that I really found fascinating around this moment is there seems to be like a clashing of tones and styles in this moment. And it almost seems like it's like the filmmaker, Forough, and maybe the producers are like trying to find a creative outlet to tell this story. You know, they're struggling to find what is the personal and truthful documentation of these people. Is it a bigger truth to tell a poetic version, or is it a bigger truth to just lay down the facts? And so, you know, depending on people's outlooks, you might have very different ways of thinking about this. But I like this idea that it almost seems at this point in the film, searching for the way, like what is the best way to tell the story. In another version, this could have been like the studio note would have been, okay, this is great, but you need to put some information in the middle of the film of what this stuff is. If there was like a Disney studio executive watching the film, it's like giving notes. And maybe this is like her trying to, all right, I'll put in one scene where I describe.
This is how she got her grant. This is there to secure the TELUS Fund health mandate.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like the whole movie's about a leper colony. No, it needs to be more medical. It's like, all right.
Why don't you tell us your thoughts on the film?
I really liked the film. It was my first time seeing it. I can absolutely see why so many Iranian filmmakers credit this as being kind of like their initial spark of inspiration and why they went into filmmaking, especially during the Iranian New Wave movement. In a weird way, it almost feels like, how there were so many filmmakers in the States in the 70s and 80s and 90s that were all like, oh, Terrence Malick was my like inspiration, was why I went in the direction that I did and is like a massive influence on my work. I can absolutely see that here with Farrokhzad's work. Mm. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Where you can see the beginnings of so many other Iranian filmmakers in her work.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which is also interesting because it's not even like it's a scripted film, right? I'm sure there were shots that were planned and they were like, go from here to there or whatever. But it's a documentary, and her poetry obviously goes without say. Like it's incredible. Just from the visual language alone, I think that it's very clear the impact that this had on Iranian cinema moving forward. And I think it's beautiful.
Pretty much everything you said, I agree with. It's like you're watching the blueprint of Kiarostami's work or something. Or like even Panahi.
Panahi, yeah.
This is like the blueprints used to discover what the Iranian cinema style was going to be like for the next 30 years, 40 years. And, it's a difficult thing for me. There's a lot of people I know I wouldn't be able to recommend this film to.
Yeah.
So it's my concern sometimes is like it's an inaccessible film for a lot of general audiences unless they are really captivated in learning about the inceptions of Iranian cinema or specifically interested in Forough Farrokhzad's poetry or leper colonies in general. I don't find it an entertaining film, and I don't think that's supposed to be the point, but it's a beautiful, again, like we both described as cinematic poetry. It's cinematic poetry captured on lens on 35 millimeter. So yeah, I really like it. Sadaf, you clearly hate this film and you don't ever want to watch it again.
Clearly. No, yeah, I love it. And I think the editing of it is so brilliant. And to just think like in cinema in general, editors, like women did most of the editing in film. And to see it in Iran too, like Forough being such a pro editor, I love that.
There's so many moments where she will cut to a scene and cut away and cut back and forth really quickly, rapidly. But then it's not like cutting to a new scene. It's like interchanging between 3 or 4 images really quickly. And I don't know if it's something about the connect. Like we'll get to it later, but like the wedding ceremony scene where they're, the woman's getting prepared. I guess it's a wedding. It seems like it's a wedding ceremony. Yeah. And it's just cutting to people in the room, like celebrating and singing. And she doesn't linger on an image for like even a second sometimes, like 1 full second. But she'll keep coming back to it. I thought was really interesting.
Yeah. There's a montage that's cut like that too, where there's like people playing, I guess like checkers with walnuts and stones. And then there's the people wrestling and there's the guy dancing, the guy pacing, like it's all intercut very quickly.
Yeah. I love that. To me, it's like she keeps telling you, are you aware of what you're watching? Just don't get comfortable watching this scene. Are you aware of what you're watching?
Yeah. You have made me drunk on indecision. How dreadful are your deeds? How dreadful are your deeds? Who's she talking about here?
That's actually what I was thinking about too. Just before before that, it's the universe is pregnant with inertia and has given birth to the wrong or like oppression. I was thinking about how timely that is even now. And I don't know who she's talking to, but
There's two ways to look at there's multiple ways to look at it, but I kind of sort of boiled it down to two. It's when she goes, "You've made me drunk on indecision. How dreadful are your deeds? How dreadful are your deeds?" The two extremes are she's either talking to humanity or she's talking to God. You know, she could be saying to humanity, "How dreadful are your deeds?" to be able to just turn your blind eye to these people that are suffering. Or it could be God, like, "How dreadful are your deeds?" to be able to create. It's a very atheistic point of view, and I actually don't really know the full extent of her relationship with spirituality. But the atheistic point of view would be, why does God create disease for children to suffer?
But is it? So I have a question. Do you think that it's atheistic, or do you think that she's theistic, but she's angry with God?
I don't know what she is.
Or is it God or humanity that she's pointing at?
Yeah, I think that line specifically is about humanity. And for me, it's the line where the kid is talking about Venus, the star, is also, I think, a reference to humanity. Like, there's tons of lines throughout the film that are just like talking about the outside and abandonment and all this stuff. Because every time it's talking about the outside, it's usually like, why did you do this?
Yeah.
And it's talking about when people close their eyes, things get more ugly. So they need the world to open their eyes. They need the world to see. That's the whole reason why they're making this film, right? And every time there's a direct reference to God, usually in the film is trying to remind people to still show their love and appreciation to God for things. Sometimes it's like an overt montage where we just see people praying and supplicating, and there are scenes where they're directly thanking God for, thank you for my eyes so that I can see. And the person saying this is someone whose eyes are still completely intact. Or thank you for my feet so that I can wander and I can journey. And it's someone whose feet are still intact. So I think that the movie is intentionally trying to separate the two, to separate the creator and to separate humanity. But Sadaf, what's your take on it?
No, I like that. It's like, is it really the creator's fault, or is it the humanity's fault? Is it your fault as a spectator just sitting there watching and ignoring?
Especially when that doctor earlier on, what's supposed to be a doctor, is saying that it's absolutely a curable disease.
Yeah.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, when those lines are being said, we see scenes of children, right? A mother breastfeeding, a girl like getting pulled on am I right? I think so.
I think so.
So it's like you see life happening, and then you hear these words, and it's like, is it really the creator's fault, or is it your fault that you're isolating them? Because they are living life. They are living. They are existing.
He says the boy at the beginning, he's reading, or I think it's at the end. Yeah, it's at the end. I think he's reading a poem. I think the idea is that the kid wrote it, but I could be wrong. It's a poem called Venus. So sometimes at twilight, we see a brighter star. Its name is Venus. Venus is very bright. The planet Venus is very close to us. The planet Venus does not twinkle.
Yeah, and I think the direct translation is the planet Venus does not blink at us.
Oh.
Right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. You're completely right. So to me, I think that's talking about how they're isolated in this colony, and they're talking about the outside world.
Yeah.
Then moving forward, she says the line, "Oh God, don't entrust the life of your dove to the wild beasts." I kind of see this kind of falling into what you guys are talking about, the dove being like the gentle creatures of life, or just humanity or life in general, that God has given life, and the wild beast being humanity and society. That we can be, the idea that we can be so cruel to one another, and God is giving us these wonderful things, life and love, and he's entrusting this wild beast, which is society, to take care of it.
Yeah.
I thought you were going to say life and nothing more.
Let listen to the soul who sings in the remote desert, the one who sighs and stretches his hands out, saying, "Alas, my wounds have numbed my spirit." Sadaf, what does that mean? Explain it to me.
Alas, my wounds have numbed my spirit. It's all there. Alas, like my disease has put me in a situation where my emotions and my feelings and my intellect is no longer used or needed. even though it's still there.
But also from Furukh's point of view, who is not suffering from leprosy, could her wounds of heartache be numbing her faith in humanity?
Knowing Forough, yes.
Yeah.
You knew Forough? I'm joking.
I wish.
I really like that line, the one that you called out. Oh God, don't entrust the life of your dove to the wild beast. I think that's excellent.
And then from there, it kind of just a lot more just shots of these people living their lives, partying, celebrating, kind of culminating in a wedding ceremony. The woman puts on her makeup to prepare to go to a wedding ceremony. And to me, this was what you were saying, Farn, and life goes on. That even here in this place, there's life still exists. Life finds a way, to use a Jurassic Park term. Kind of the same thing that you could almost imagine Kiarostami thinking about this film when he's making Life and Nothing More, or And Life Goes On, is that even in the most desolate of places where there's leprosy or an earthquake has decimated this entire village, people are finding a way to persevere and move on and celebrate life.
Yeah. Can we skipped over a little section that I was curious what people's thoughts were.
Yep.
So after the guy who's singing, there's someone who's pacing back and forth in the alley, and there's a voiceover of all the days of the week and the months of the year being listed. What do you think is the intention behind pairing the visuals and the audio there?
That's one of my favorite scenes. The way it's the passing of time and how nothing happens, and then everything's so stale and stagnant. And I think it's so brilliant in the way she just puts everything sequence by sequence after one another, is that at the beginning, it feels like, oh, I'm going to give you, the audience, what you're looking for, this sad story of a leper colony. Life doesn't really go on here. They're being eradicated. This is the disease. And then in the second half of the film, it's like, no, that's not, I know you're here for that, but that's not what you're going to see. There's life here. And my poem's going to be very directed at you. And then sort of ends with the Venus and like the school. And we'll get to the ending, because the ending is also very beautiful. But I think it was done very intentionally to just make people think, oh, there's not really that much of a life here. People are just waiting to die. They're not waiting to die. They're living.
Yeah, that's exactly what I thought was the idea of the... she's trying to kind of hammer home the expectation of, you want to see the uselessness and repetition of this life. It's just Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, January, February, March, April. And this guy pacing back across the window. And then she cuts to what's inside each one of the windows. And there's like usually something like quite charming or beautiful. There's like a flower pot or a kettle or something. But it's like, if you're just watching from this angle, you're just seeing a guy pace. But if you see it from another angle, he's like looking into the window. He's greeting his people he might know. And so this idea of like, oh, you just want to hear that there's monotony and repetition and uselessness here. That's my takeaway from that.
So he keeps walking. We see his POV, who he's looking at. Then we get a shot of a chalkboard. And on the chalkboard, it says, I won't be here for the spring, but this note will. And I think that kind of goes back to what you were talking about, Sadaf, where it's building this environment where it's kind of giving the audience where they want, where it's like, oh yeah, look how depressed everything is and how sad everyone is and like how stuck everything is. Then we get that clinical analysis where the clinical analysis is like, yeah, it's curable. And then after that, we get this whole montage where people are praying. People are praying in a room together. There's people praying in the courtyard by themselves. That to me was also interesting because, I don't know, a lot of movies around this time period, I feel like in Iran, we're actually trying to insert more and more spirituality into films, like in new wave movements in Iran. Also,
because like in terms of spirituality and religion, we got to think about Iran at the time, and people at the time were quite religious and spiritual. So that's also speaking to the audience in that way, like the people we are showing, they're just as spiritual as you and they're just as religious, sort of to connect to the audience, I think, in that way.
Yeah, there was kind of like a movement to be more spiritual again in the 50s and in the 60s and in the 70s in Iran. Obviously that got hijacked tremendously.
Yeah.
But I think that the initial intention for it was quite pure. And so to show that, like, look, even in this scenario where people are treating it as if it's this hell and it's this like terrible place, and there was all this stigma around it, right? It's like, no, these are still deeply spiritually connected people.
Yeah.
Which I think was important to show. And then we see them getting their food. Actually, before they get their food, there's a scene where there's these like, there's something being handed out to everyone. Was that medicine or food? What is that?
That was like, medicine.
That was medicine. So they get their medicine. Oh, you know what's interesting is they're getting their medicine handed out to them. I only just thought of this now. They get their medicine handed out to them, then they pray, then they eat, which is kind of like different forms of nourishment, right? One is treating their illness, the other one is treating their soul, and then the last one is giving them their nourishment for their body.
Oh, interesting. I didn't think about that. I love that.
Prayer, food, and medicine. Like you said, only 2 of those 3 things would actually help them, but yeah, I agree. I'm really curious about Forough's, like, what was her spirituality? She wasn't like, do you know anything about her religion or spirituality or where she stood?
I don't know about her spirituality. I know she loved love, or the experience of it. And she had this odd relationship with death.
Yeah. Which is sardonic.
But she wasn't
somewhat
ironic.
She
she wasn't afraid of it. She wasn't afraid of death.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to touch on that a little bit later. Because even in this, she talks about how she like shuts her eyes and sees the infinite void or something. There's a lot of references to death in this piece too. And it seems very reflective.
But then, but I feel like the second half of the movie is kind of a response to that. I think especially when you come out of that, the little infomercial in the middle, not infomercial, but the little like medical analysis in the middle. I think when you come after that, there's 2 parts to what she's saying. I feel like it's kind of like a call and response, where the first half she's like, everything is terrible. Why is everything bad? We've been abandoned, all this stuff. And then the second half of it is kind of like a response that like, even in these dark moments, there is this light. We're still able to do all these things. We're still able to persevere. And I think that is very true to people who deal with different kind of illnesses, where illness is very stigmatized, whether it be leprosy, whether it be, even something like heart disease, or if someone is missing an arm or a leg, or if someone is dealing with an autoimmune disease, where sometimes people treat them like, oh, wow, that really sucks. That person has a terrible life. Like, that person's in a wheelchair. Oh, wow, that really sucks, all this stuff. But if you speak to someone who's in a wheelchair, or you speak to someone with that autoimmune disease, or you speak to someone with a heart problem, like, they don't look at life like that. Yeah. There might be moments where, they feel bad for themselves, but then they're like, oh no, these are the cards that I've been dealt in life, and I'm still very capable. I can still continue to live my life. And so when you look at it like that, then the only thing left to really be said about the situation is, why is humanity treating us like this? Why are they treating us as if we're these outcasts, right? Like that term of like being like treating someone like a leper, like that's a proverb for a reason. And I think it's because people treat the sick very poorly. And I think that second half of her poem at the end of the film, I think, is kind of like a response to that.
She said in an interview once, anybody who had gone to see the lepers had in fact looked only at their defects. But as God is my witness, I would sit with them at their tablecloth, and I would touch their wounds and their fingerless hands and toeless feet. This is how they learned to trust me, and I tested myself, from which I returned with a special joy at succeeding in doing something so that people who had never seen kindness could love and trust me.
Yeah, no, I agree to all of it. And she did. She lived with them for 2 weeks before she even like brought out the camera.
So the final scene is the students in the school, and the teacher is asking specific students to, the first student she asks is to name 4 good things. And the boy is who, Sadaf?
Hossein Mansouri, her adopted son.
Yes, Forough went on to adopt Hossein from the leper colony and raised her for the rest of her life,
Yeah.
which was another 3 years.
Yeah.
Or 4 years.
4 years, yeah.
And yeah, so this is a boy who their parents were at the leper colony, but both lepers and quite sick. He had not been afflicted with this, right? Is that not true?
So his mother was cured, his dad.
Oh, okay.
And I think his sister.
Okay.
They were in the leper colony. Interesting fact, they actually, at the time, I think there were 3 big leper colonies in Iran, one in Mashhad, one in Tabriz, and I'm not sure about the other one. But they were in Mashhad. Hussein's family moved from the leper colony in Mashhad to Tabriz. And that's one thing about the film. The people in the film, they don't speak Farsi. They speak Azeri.
Yeah.
So when Hussein arrived there, this was from one of his interviews, Forough came back and like after 2 weeks when they arrived there. And she had already visited the colony once before, but she wasn't able to communicate with the people what she was trying to do. So Hussein's dad actually sort of translated for her. And he was like, and apparently his dad told Forough that what bothers us lepers is not the disease, it's the way people treat us.
Right.
He actually said that to Forough. And so that's how Forough was able to like communicate with the people there, what she wanted to do. This is from an interview Hossein did with VOA like 15 years ago or something. I found it on YouTube. I was like,
Oh,
yes.
that's cool.
So at the time, he's still just a student there. He says the 4 things he says are beautiful are what?
They are the moon, the sun, flowers, and games.
That's right. Then the teacher asks another student to name a couple things that are ugly, and the kid says...
Hands, feet, head.
Which the kids laugh at, which is good that they laugh at that. I like that moment. And then the student comes up to the chalkboard, and the teacher asks him to write a sentence that has the word black in it, and to which he writes on the board,
the house is black.
Was this a real moment or was this scripted? Not that I'm saying it was scripted, but it just seems so perfectly beautiful. It's so poetic.
So,
and I know that it's like the title, it's the perfect title for this thing. But can you inform us on this scene?
It's scripted because, first of all, Farsi wasn't their first language. And also, Hossein also mentioned that Forough told me to say those 4 words.
Okay, I had a feeling. It's fine still, but it was just such a beautiful moment.
What about when the kids say hands, feet, head? Is that scripted?
Probably. My understanding is, and whenever I see that scene, is that this is not their first language, and you can hear it, how they're trying to understand if there's Farsi dialogue. So I'm just wondering if they knew at the time how much Farsi they knew, or if they were comfortable speaking it. Probably knew Farsi, but like it wasn't something they were fluent in, maybe.
I mean, part of the reason why there would have been a class there, I assume, is to also teach these children Farsi.
That's true. Yeah. True.
There are a couple other little scenes that in the second half, like there's that with the wedding scene, the party scene, which is good to see. That was kind of in the response to the call part, like in the call and response. Then there's the little girl whose hair is being brushed while she's listening to the guys singing. I thought that scene was very sweet. Kids playing volleyball.
Behind the scenes in trivia. I'm going to go through this a little bit chronologically, but if there's anything Sadaf specifically that I'm missing, just interrupt me, okay?
Okay. I probably don't, but okay.
Forough Farrokhzad was born December 29th, 1934 in Tehran. She was a controversial modernist poet and an iconoclastic feminist author. She was born to the career military officer Colonel Mohammed Bagher Farrokhzad. Did you know her father was like a famous colonel, or like a very prominent colonel?
I think he was in Reza Khan's not army, but like when they marched to Tehran, when they marched in Tehran to take over Tehran, he was there. He was with him.
Okay, wow. She's the 4th of 7 children. She attended school until the 9th grade. She was taught painting and sewing at a girls' school for the manual arts. Farrokhzad spent 9 months in Europe in 1958. After returning to Iran in search of a job, she met celebrated modernist short story writer, novelist, and new wave filmmaker Ebrahim Golestan, who reinforced her own inclinations to express herself and live independently, and with whom she began a love affair. During this time, she published 2 new volumes of poetry, The Wall and The Rebellion. Her most notable works today are the collections of poetry The Captive in 1955, The Wall in 1956, The Rebellion in 1958, and Another Birth in 1964. Am I missing any other prominent ones?
No, I think these are the ones. I may be not remembering.
Forough's filmmaking output must be seen in terms of her relation to Golestan, as well as separate from him. Soon after joining the Golestan Film Workshop, which henceforth is GFW, she moved beyond secretarial duties for which she had initially been hired and into production, working both behind and in front of the cameras. At the same time, her relationship with Golestan deepened into both a romance and a professional partnership. Forough's first cinematic role was editor on a documentary called Fire, a film on the subject of an oil gusher in Awaz. Her creative addition brought life to an otherwise dull subject. So for her next project, she was brought on as director and co-editor of a documentary called Water and Heat. Was she director of that one? Ab Bakgama, 1961.
I'm not sure. I thought this was the only film she directed. Maybe
That's
this
what
is
I
the
thought
only
too.
documentary she directed.
But this is saying it was I might remove that line. It might be wrong. She was definitely a co-editor on a documentary called Water and Heat, which was also about oil. As an actor, Forough had a walk-on part on Golestan's first feature, Brick and Mirror, or Mud, Brick and Mirror, Khesht va Aine, 1965. She was the fully veiled woman who leaves her baby in the taxi, thereby setting off the whole story. Have you seen that film?
I haven't. I want to, and I haven't yet.
I've seen it. It's a taxi driver sees that his last customer left a baby in the car, and is trying to find and Forough plays that woman who leaves the baby in the car. On shooting The House is Black, Forough said, "The first day that I saw the lepers, I was deeply moved. It was terrible. In the leper colony, a number of people live who possess all the qualities and feelings of a human being minus his face. I saw a woman whose face was only a hole through which she talked." She probably said this all in Farsi.
Yep.
This was not a typical institutional film in that it did not laud the services of its sponsors, the Society of Assistance to Lepers. In fact, it set the tone and became the model for poetic realist documentaries and the vision for what Mehnaz Said Wafa and Jonathan Rosenbaum, two critics, aptly called radical humanism. She not only edited the film herself, but it was shot over a period of 12 days with crew members from the GFW. Golestan had said that he had no involvement in the shooting and editing of the film, but that he had contributed 2 shots, one of the pigeons flying above and another of the stagnant water with the floating leaves. Those were that was his footage that he had shot, and they included in the footage. Nevertheless, he claimed that there was a harmony of ideas amongst the GFW staff. After the shoot, Forough adopted Hossein Mansouri, the son of 2 colony members who had been afflicted with leprosy. And did you know, Sadaf and Farhan, but Sadaf might have already known this, that there's a documentary that digs deeper into this relationship called Moon, Sun, Flower, Game. It's a documentary by filmmaker Klaus Stiegel about Hossein's life and his relationship with Forough, who took care of him for 3 years before her untimely death.
Yeah. There's another documentary about her biological son, Kamyar Shapur, also. It's on YouTube.
During her life, Forough had forbidden Hossein to watch The House is Black. But at 32, grown up and as a patent officer in Munich, Hossein had a crisis of identity and national origin, and he watched it. It made him feel grounded and reconnected. Although the film attracted little attention outside Iran when released, it has since been recognized as a landmark in Iranian cinema. Reviewer Eric Henderson described the film as one of the prototypal essay films. In 1963, the film was awarded the grand prize for documentary category at the International Short Film Festival Oberhausen in West Germany. It was the only film Forough directed before her death in 1967. February 14th, 1967, Forough Farrokhzad was in a really bad car accident. The estimation is that she swerved to avoid a bus that was heading in her direction, and her car had rolled off the side of the road, rolled over several times, and she was pronounced dead by the time she had arrived at the hospital. She had hit her head against the curb. She was thrown from the car and hit against the curb.
Oh, jeez.
In Farzaneh Milani's book, Forough Farrokhzad, a literary biography and unpublished letters, cites an interview with Ebrahim Golestan, who speaks about Forough's final moments where she died in his arms.
Sadaf is holding up the book right now.
Oh, you have the book.
I have the book.
Nice.
It's a huge book.
Why was it flipped open to the middle? Are you currently halfway through reading it?
No, there's copies of Forough's letters to Golestan, and there's a letter when she went to Italy for a film festival that her film The House is Black played in, and I want to mention this. I don't know the name of the festival, but basically she keeps writing to him I don't like it here, blah blah blah, and then apparently they showed her film at 12 a.m. at night. It was like one
Like
of the
midnight?
last, midnight. It was one of the last films they showed. And she complains how the first 5 minutes, people weren't even in the theater. Like they were outside smoking and then they came in. And then a couple minutes in, they lost audio. But overall, like she didn't win any prizes, but people loved her film and praised her for it. Anyway, I don't know. I thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, no, that's really good. That's all I have for behind the scenes of the film. Anything else that you think is important to mention?
The day that she died, like there's a documentary also that has interviews of her mom. And it's just this thing that I remember her mom said, like I had heard that when people are about to die, their lips go cold. So that day when Forough wanted to leave the house, she came and she kissed me and her lips were cold. And suddenly I felt like, what if something happens to my daughter? And I told her to be extra careful. And so she never returned. And then the same with Hossein. His story was he was at home. He was playing hide and seek with his grandma. Wasn't really playing. He was trying to like annoy his grandma by hiding behind a chair. And then hearing his grandma answering the phone. And then she didn't take the news well. And then he forgot all about hiding and then came out, and then it was a very emotional experience.
Critical reactions. This film, The House is Black, became 19th in Sight and Sound's top 50 greatest documentaries of all time. Number 19. Included amongst the 1001 movies you must see before you die, edited by Steven Schneider. Jonathan Rosenbaum of the Chicago Reader, who we talked about a lot, loves
Why
Iranian
do we always go to this guy?
This guy loved Iranian cinema. This guy like made it his passion to bring attention to Iranian cinema. He called it the most powerful Iranian film I've ever seen. Mm-hmm. On the film's release and its screening at Saudi Cinema in Tehran, most critics praised The House is Black, although Shamim Bahar and Parviz Nouri famously criticized it. Those are two Iranian critics and filmmakers. It was screened for Empress Farah and Princess Ashraf, who cried during the screening. It's quoted that Ashraf rose to embrace Forough, and despite her reluctance, Forough responded.
You know how they edited 2 films about oil and like oil spills? So at the time, that was like a big deal. This was after the coup against Mossadegh. And so they were a bit political too. And from my readings, from what I understood at the time, it was not easy being political. Not that it wasn't easy. It was not good to be political, but political artists had a little leeway. So I think Golestan and Forough also had a bit of a, not political, but like social, they weren't happy with the Shah, maybe. And I read somewhere that the point of the film was to like show the Shah, like, you're not doing a good job. And they didn't take it that way, or like something like that.
Okay, I have that quote.
Oh, okay.
According to his Social History of Iranian Cinema by Hamid Nafisi, Forough and Golestan claimed that in making this film, they had, quote unquote, absolutely no intention to criticize our society and circumstances. But this writer, the writer of this book, says it was perhaps a necessary ploy under repressive censorship to avoid endangering their safety.
Yeah.
So they'd officially announced that there was no commentary on the Shah, but this writer thinks that this was likely something they had to say out loud and publicly facing. Forough herself admitted elsewhere to a critical encoding of the film in general. This is a film about the leper's life and at the same time about life in general. This is a direct quote. This is a portrayal of any closed and claustrophobic society, an image of uselessness, isolation, and sequestrations. About all of us who are in one way or another imprisoned in our respective lives with nowhere to escape. She added, we started the film with a leper woman and a mirror. This woman is the symbol of man who sees his life in a mirror, in any mirror. And this has pushed us right into deeper analysis right now at this point. So let's just also break apart some stuff if we haven't talked about it. Farhan, you haven't said anything in a while.
I was listening.
Okay, it's a good podcast. Just wanted to give an opportunity to jump in if you want to. So from deeper analysis, we move to best scene. What was your favorite moment in this film, Sadaf?
Me? There's a scene where you see the kids playing, and then there's a little boy that is throwing the ball at like the camera, and then it cuts to a man with clutches, and he walks, and he takes up the whole frame.
Yeah.
and it turns dark black. And then Forough says in the voiceover, we long for light and now there's darkness. And I believe after that we go to the school. For me, maybe this is also a deeper analysis, but for me, like there is hope and then she takes away the hope from you. She gives you hope, she takes away. She's like, it's like a yo-yo, like there is life, but are you realizing that you're taking away that life? And I think it was so powerful, that scene and the way it was edited. And also I have just leading up to my other favorite part of the film, throughout the film, there are like a couple of scenes where you see people walking into the frame and like taking over the frame as if they're moving beyond the frame. There's a one with a wheelchair where they walk the wheelchair in the frame, and then this man with the clutches who walks inside the frame. But at the very end, as we have the student writing, "The house is black," and we see the people walking towards the frame, all of a sudden the people are stopped and the doors close on them.
Yeah, yeah.
And we're positioned outside the frame now. I thought it was so brilliantly done.
It's a beautiful moment.
Mm-hmm.
And very intentional.
Do you have a favorite between those two? Does one kind of inch out over the other for you?
I guess the walking in the frame and then just excluding us from it. So like stopping people, right?
And then the doors close and on the door is written
Leper Colony, yeah.
Leper Colony, yeah. And then
also
it's finished off by the guy writing "The house is black."
Also, Leper Colony, we say Leper Colony in English, but in Farsi it's Jozam Khane, or Leper House. Hence, the house is black.
The house is black, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mine is, it's funny, I thought you were going to say the same one as mine at first when you said the kid, and then you said crutches. I was like, is it the same one? So my favorite scene is there's a girl running off with a shovel, and she's like dragging it behind her and like kind of pretending like it's a horse or something as she's like running away. And then a little boy sees her doing this. And he runs up and he asks one of the old men for his crutch, and he gives it to the boy, and then the boy runs off after her doing the same thing with the crutch. And then the VO says, "Oh God, don't entrust the life of your dove to the wild beasts." And I think that it really accentuates the innocence of these kids and the playfulness of children, even living in this scenario, in this colony where you're hearing the VO up until this point talking about how everything's terrible. Then this is kind of the turning point in the film where we see, oh, they're making the best of what they have, and we're first introduced to that through these kids. And I don't think that it's a coincidence that they're doing it with the shovel and the crutch. The shovel, which is often used to bury the dead, and the crutch, which is used to assist those who are able to continue living, but obviously with much difficulty. And even in those circumstances, kids are finding a way to play. And then the voiceover talks about entrusting the lives of these doves with the wild beasts, the beasts being the outside world. And then it's that section is kind of finished off with a shot of the doves flying in the sky. I just thought that whole little segment was beautiful.
Yeah, I agree. And it just shows you like the environment the kids are growing up in. The things they have to play with are crutches and like shovels. Yeah, and sort of the crutch that the boy is holding, if he's not taken out of the colony, will eventually be what he will be using when he grows up and the disease sort of takes over.
Although that boy might not have leprosy.
That was Hossein. No, he doesn't.
Oh, that was Hossein?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
My favorite scene is the two bookends of the scenes in the classroom, and it actually makes me feel a little bit bad knowing now that it's the only scripted scene, the one at the end.
I think it is.
No, I think you're right, because it feels a little too perfect. But I also think, to defend it, it makes me feel like we were so robbed of what potentially could have been Forough the filmmaker for non-documentary stuff. If that is a scripted scene, it's such a beautiful scene. It's so beautifully, quote unquote, written and directed that in that moment, you're like, man, Khomeini couldn't have been in a car accident, but like she was. You know, we couldn't have some evil dictator die in a car accident, but we lost her to time. And we were robbed as a culture of probably another 40 years. The more books of poetry that she would have written, the films she would have made as a director of making fictional material, I feel like we were genuinely robbed of her art for 40 years. And so I love that scene because if it is unscripted, let it stand out as the only scene she ever directed of an unscripted or a scripted piece of fiction.
Yeah.
So that's my favorite scene, and it makes me feel like I lament the loss of Forough Farrokhzad.
It almost feels like a reverse Kiarostami in a way, where Kiarostami has these fiction movies and he'll often have moments of real life, where for her it was like, oh, this is real life, and then there's these little moments of scripted mastery.
Least favorite scene? Like, should we just skip? I don't know what people would say with his least favorite scene.
I had one.
Really? Okay, I'd love to hear it.
There's a shot of a mullah walking through the grounds, and I was like, get that out of here.
Okay, yeah.
It was
There's
like
also one at the
shot.
wedding ceremony.
A mullah? Like straight up? Like with the whole
I think
abba and the turban and everything?
Yeah. He's walking through the wedding ceremony, which is why you know he's going to get someone married.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess if it's for a wedding, he can be there. But there's another one where just like randomly, as it's like showing shots of the leper colony, there's a shot of him walking through, and I was like, get him out of there.
Okay, fair enough. That's a good call. Do you have a least favorite scene, Sadaf? I don't.
I don't.
Wow, you guys liked having that random mullah walking through, huh?
Damn, that's literal poetry. Because it's literally poetry in this instance. What is your favorite quote? You could give one or two, but give your number one for sure first. We'll each give our number one first so that we don't step on each other's.
There's so many, but the one that got me emotional was the universe is pregnant with inertia and has given birth to the wrong or to oppression. She just says it so beautifully.
Yeah.
And the words in Farsi she chooses. And also, I just feel like right now, the state of the world we're in, I feel like she spoke to us right now as well.
There's a version on IMDb that says the universe is pregnant with inertia and has given birth to time. And when I Googled to try to find which was the right version, that one showed up multiple times. So Zolm is the wrong. Yeah, the wrong, right?
Zolm is oppression, yeah.
So why does the other version show up multiple times on Google too?
Maybe they misheard it.
Yeah,
Zolm
okay.
Zaman, maybe? I don't know.
Sorry, Zolm is what? Zolm is what?
Oppression.
Okay.
Wrongdoing.
Okay.
Yeah. And I love the word Albistan. She could have said hamile, which both words mean pregnant. But Albistan, I don't know. She's a master at using words.
Yeah.
The right words.
Why do you like that she used Abistan more?
Albistan also means like you're pregnant and there's water in your belly, right? Hamile just means you're carrying something. I don't know. I just love that word Albistan.
Yeah. No, it might even just be the sound.
Abistan would directly translate to what? Like realm of water?
I don't know. But from my understanding of the words, Albistan has to do something with water. No? Maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. I have no idea.
I'm pretty sure Abistan was the capital of Afghanistan.
I knew it. I knew you were going to say something stupid.
Farhan, what's your favorite? Damn, that's literal poetry.
I'm picking this one. I mean, I've talked about similar references to this in other films. And there's a scene where we hear the voiceover saying, "My bones were not hidden from you when I was created, for I was fashioned from the depths of the earth."
استخوان‌هایم از تو پنهان نبود وقتی که در نهان به وجود می آمدم و در اسفل زمین نقش بندی می گشتم.
And I thought that was beautiful, especially because it refers back to imagery and symbolism in a lot of different spiritualities about being created from the earth and returning to the earth. And there's just tons of references to being conceived and creation and being born and returning to the earth and dying, like throughout this film, that I thought that one quote takes the whole movie and boils it down into one little sentence.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's something she said or it's actually from like the Quran or the Torah.
It's not directly from the Torah or the Quran, but there are similar lines in both.
Mm.
And a lot of Sufi poetry makes reference to the idea of being created from the earth and returning to the earth. What was what was the episode that we talked about it? It was the Kiarostami film.
The Wind Will Carry Us.
Wind Will Carry Us, yeah, has a couple direct references to it as well.
I think there's like a saying in Farsi where we are from the earth and we return to the earth.
Yeah, that one is from the Bible, and then there's a second part that gets added to it. So that's from the Jewish Bible. Then there's a second part that gets added to it, which is in the Quran, and then there's another part that gets added to it in the Baha'i faith as well.
Ah, okay.
So it's like layered. Khajeh?
Well, my first one was "The universe is pregnant with inertia." That was my favorite quote. But since you gave that, I have a backup I'll give, which was, "I said if I had wings of a dove, I would fly away and be at rest. I would go far away and take refuge in the desert. I would hasten my escape from the windy storm and tempest, for I have seen misery and wickedness on earth."
گفتم کاش مرا بالها مثل کبوتر می بود تا پرواز کرده راحتی می یافتم. هر آینه به جایی دور می رفتم و در صحرا مأوا می گزیدم. می شتافتم به سوی پناهگاهی از باد تند و طوفان شدید. زیرا که در زمین مشقت و شرارت دیدم.
And one thing I like about that is it almost seems like you're so disappointed with humanity that you're like, I'm just about ready to leave this place. Mm-hmm. Like I can't take on all this pain and suffering that you've inflicted upon yourselves. And there's a sort of dark, shadowy, morose element to it, considering the fact that she died extremely young, very tragically, and was writing these lines of dialogue being like, I have taken upon myself all of your pain and all the torment you do. I can't take it. I'm happy to just leave this earth. I'm ready. I'm set. And she died a few years later.
Yeah, it's like a foreshadow.
Yeah, exactly.
Also, Forough committed suicide twice.
Attempted.
Sorry, committed.
You only successfully do it. You can only do it once. Really.
Yeah.
Once attempted to commit suicide twice.
It makes sense. I mean, there's a long list of poets who've successfully committed suicide, like from Sylvia Plath, Virginia Woolf.
Oh, Virginia Woolf?
Yeah, she put rocks in her pocket and went to the water. Stones.
I'm doing a lot of research on suicide right now for a film that I'm writing. There's this thing called suicide contagion, when you are exposed to either people you directly know or you've heard of or in your social circle that have either experienced suicidal ideation or attempted suicide or have committed suicide, that it almost starts to normalize suicide as a logical response to trauma and to even like hormonal or chemical imbalances or to depression, high anxiety, things like that. And I think that because we avoid as a society talking about the tragedy of suicide and how those feelings are really an illness, the only time when it's brought up is when it's really glorified. So I just want to mention that if you're listening to this and you're hearing about all these poets whose work is acclaimed and they have done this, just note that that is obviously not a route that you want to go about if you are having a hard time. So please reach out for help.
Skipping over favorite performance, I don't know, like how to. Unless Farhan, you have a best actor Academy Award to give us.
I didn't write best performance, worst performance, none of that.
Nitpicks, hot takes, what aged poorly? I don't have any.
Me neither.
Okay, Sadaf, you're shaking your head as well.
No.
And in fact, the version that I have, it's a 4K restoration that they made with the collaboration of Ibrahim Gulistan. Like he worked with them and gave them the original film print to do it.
Yeah.
And it looks beautiful. Like it really holds up.
That's the Criterion version. Double feature lineup. If you were going to screen this with a film, and this would go nicely as a short to go before a film, what would you double feature this with?
I would. Now I wouldn't put this before any film. I think it's a world of its own. But I would love to see it with Buñuel's Land Without Bread.
Oh, okay. I haven't seen that.
What is it?
It's a satire. It's a satire documentary. It's so good. And his was Land Without Bread was made in 1933. And she made hers in 1963, 30 years after. And I just always wonder if she watched Buñuel's film before making this film. You should watch it, but it's a satire.
Is it 28 minutes long?
Yeah.
Okay, I found it. Interesting.
It's a satire documentary, and it gets more and more absurd as we move forward. And it's supposed to be so factual, and he starts so factually, and then it just gets more bizarre. Like his narration gets more bizarre, and it doesn't make sense with the images we see. And he is just basically judging how documentaries at the time were made, how just like people who were being documented were not really taken into consideration, like what they wanted to be documented and what they wanted to be said about them. I actually wrote a paper also about that and compared it to Nanook of the North.
Oh, cool.
By Albert Flaherty. Because I think his is exact like satire version of Nanook of the North, kind of. And I just wonder if Forough ever, because he also has a classroom scene and all that. I just wonder if she saw that and she was like, I'm going to make a film that's going to make the audience think about what they're doing here watching this film. Because that's what he did, right? He was like, constantly you're like, what am I doing here watching this film? I came here to see some poor people, but no, this is not it.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's a great corollary.
Anyway,
I've seen Exterminating Angels, the Buñuel film. Have you seen that one? It's a satire as well. It's about a bunch of like high class guests at a party who are incapable of leaving. Like they literally just can't compel themselves to exit the party, and they don't know what's overcome them. It's like some supernatural forces. Like they can't leave the party. They're like at one point, like the police and fire department come because they just can't leave. There's no explanation given. It's so funny. It's really funny.
That's so good.
Yeah, it's really good.
That's like surrealism at its best because it's like that's the stuff of your dreams.
Yeah. Surrealism and satire too, of just like high class. Satire, you can't leave this lavish party. Farhan, do you have a double feature lineup in mind?
Yeah, Motorcycle Diaries.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know about the film?
No.
Yeah, it's about the biopic on Che Guevara and Castro, right?
Not Castro. Che Guevara and his buddy Alberto Granado.
Mm-hmm.
I think one was a biochemist and the other was a med student. They were traveling around the Latin American countryside. So I think they started in Central America and worked their way down. Or maybe other way around. But essentially, the film is an adaptation of his journals that he was keeping, journals and letters that he was keeping throughout his travels. And he passes by exploited mine workers, persecuted communists, ostracized lepers. And he also meets an Inca community or a few Inca communities and sees kind of the state that they're living in compared to this like massive empire that they once were. And it completely changed his outlook on life and it led to him becoming a revolutionary. So it's kind of like Che Guevara's origin story, if you will. And there's about halfway through the film, they go to this leper colony and he stays there. And again, because he was a med student and his buddy was a biochemist, they're able to like take kind of what they know and work with the doctors who are there, and they learn a lot and they help the people in the colony, and his mindset completely changes, like his viewpoint on the sick. He allegorically takes the way that lepers are treated there and applies it to the way that exploited peoples are treated all over Latin America. So it's a really cool movie. I have not yet read the book, but the movie's very well done, and I think that this short played before the film might actually be a really good pairing.
Cool. I have, as a double feature lineup, another documentary about the government's response to disease and infection. It's called Plandemic. It's the conspiracy theory film about the COVID-19 response. I'm just kidding. I'm kidding, Sadaf. I would have this paired with Brick and Mirror, Ibrahim Golastan's first feature film, because it was done under the same studio system, approximately around the same time. And I feel like you could watch this film first, and then just for a tonally different movie, watch a film that features Forough, in the first shot. opening scenes and directed by her lover at the time, which is Godestan. So those are my two pairs. You start with that film. You start with House is Black, followed by Brick and Mirror. Can this be a Hollywood remake? I say emphatically no.
No.
No, I mean, like, even just the number of people with leprosy has like completely dropped.
Yeah, an update on the leper colony of Baba Bari is now a Baba Bari hospice, or at least back in 2015 it was. And there were like 200 patients in there. And the staff there were actually the families of the patients.
I see. Okay, cool. Final thoughts and grades. Sadaf, why don't you start giving your grade and your final thoughts of the film?
So final thoughts. I think for its time, the film was brilliant. And like you were saying, Khajeh, it's a shame that we lost her, because imagine the 40 years of like films she would have made, or her wisdom and knowledge that could have been shared with people who came after her. Like, she could have been an amazing mentor, and like, just imagine the people would have like learned from her and created as a result. And in another interview that I saw, it was about Godestan, Ibrahim Godestan. His son Khajeh Godestan said after Forough died, a part of my dad died with him too. Like, he wasn't the same creative man that he was before Forough died. So a world died with her. I think a whole creative world died with her. And what we have of her is such a treasure. I'd give her 100.
Wow.
This is such I love this film.
So
I love her.
A++.
A++.
Wow, we had no A++s, and then all of a sudden we get two back-to-back A++s by our guest.
They play too fast and loose with the grading.
Yeah, I think so too. But whatever, you can call it what you want.
What was the other A++?
White Meadows is the one that got A++.
Okay.
Farn, grades and final whatevers.
Final thoughts. I really liked it. I thought it was really beautiful to see, especially the nexus of so much that would come from it. I think it's a tragedy that we lost her so young. Yeah, I mean, I feel like we've all kind of already said our feelings on it, on the film. I mean, one thing I'll say is like it's only like a 21-minute movie, and it is what it is. Like, you watch it and it's basically her poetry kind of laid out over top of the visuals. And I really like the call and response part to it. The first time I was watching it, when I was listening to her poetry talking about, like everything is so dark, everything's terrible, all this stuff, it actually bothered me a lot initially, because I was like, this feels really exploitative of the sick. But then the second part comes in where she starts responding to it, and she shows, oh no, they're actually having a great time. They're like, despite what's going on, they're still living their lives. They're still getting married. They're still playing. They're doing what they can. My opinion of the film completely flipped, where I was disappointed. And that was the one thing that I wrote down on what aged poorly. I crossed it off because I was like, oh, this is done intentionally. And I think the amount of awareness that it takes to do that, and to really comment on it shows that she knows what she's doing and she understands people, And so for that, I'm giving it a high grade. I'm still not quite Sadaf high, but I'll give it an A.
Yeah. I give it an A-. It's, that puts it around fair for me. I think it's a beautiful piece of poetry, and it's a great, fantastic sort of perspective on doing a documentary on important subject matter. It's something I'd put on when I'm in the mood to ingest art rather than watch cinema or be entertained. It's a hard film because I have so much empathy for this. Like, I can't be like, oh man, you have to watch this film. You have to get it, even at where it stands in the pantheon of the starting point blueprint for Iranian cinema. It's not like I can't keep coming back to the well to watch this film again and again unless I'm doing it for academic purposes like you were set up. Or for this. This is my third time watching it. I watched it once a few years ago. And in a lot of ways, especially with music too, when you see the blueprint, it's not always the best version of that thing. Like it's I would have loved to have seen what she would have done from here on. I think if she had continued being a filmmaker and making more films, her best work was yet to come. And so to me, this is not 100% for what it is for you. And that's great that it is. I think it's like a squarely in the A minus, the low, high 80s, low 90s are still a great mark. I'm a little bit more like this wouldn't even be one of my favorite documentaries in terms of what it's telling us, the story it's telling.
I mean, I will say, Khajeh, you told me a while back that you were like, you have to see this. You talked about this as if it was like a seminal Iranian film.
It is. It's an important film.
Okay.
It's it's a very important film for what it did for Iranian cinema.
I mean, A- is still a very good grade. Like in our grading system, that translates to like an 80% if it was like a school grade.
Yeah.
One thing I would say, and I'll still keep it at A++, but just in terms of documentary, thinking about it, if the film was to be made, like let's say even 20 years after it was made, like I would be critical of how maybe the people were treated in that. Maybe the people in the leper colony should have had a right to tell their own stories and not necessarily speak in Farsi, speak in their own language. Even like, families could be taught how to use a camera or how to record their voice to tell their own stories. But it was at a time where it was like a camera was such a big deal.
Right.
And that would be something that I would be critical of if had it been made much later.
So then do you still give it an A++?
Always to Forough.
Wow, okay. So despite the fact that there's flaws, you're still giving it a flawless grade.
Yeah. No, I cannot not.
Okay. All right, fair enough.
Just to add to what you were just saying, Sadaf, it's also coming at a time where just being a woman and being a filmmaker was an impossibility.
Yeah.
So not even forget the lepers. It's just the women. So the fact that Forough was making this film is already trailblazing.
Yeah, and Forough herself was such a controversial figure in Iran, even like back then. So anyway.
So this means that our Cinema Rex average score is an A.
An A, yeah.
Good grade. The only film directed by trailblazing feminist Iranian poet Forough Farrokhzad finds unexpected grace where few others think to look. A leper colony whose inhabitants live, worship, learn, play, and celebrate in a self-contained community cut off from the rest of the world. Through ruminative voiceover narration drawn from the Old Testament, the Quran, and the filmmaker's own poetry and unflinching images that refuse to look away from the physical difference, Forough creates a profoundly empathic portrait of those cast off by society, a face-to-face encounter with the humanity behind the disease, a key forerunner of the Iranian New Wave. The House is Black is a triumph of transcendent lyricism from a visionary artist whose life was tragically cut short, but whose influence is only beginning to be fully appreciated. To Forough, we salute your legacy. To Sadaf, thank you for joining us yet again to the Cinema Rex podcast.
Thank you, Sadaf.
Thank you for having me. I had such a great conversation.
Thank you for coming.
It's great. Thank you.
Farhan, you know how I feel about you.
Khajeh, you're the best.
To our audience, thank you for listening, and Be'omid Didar.
Bye. Music for Cinema Rex was written and performed by Sohail Sadinejad.